What's in store for government contracting and regulations? Paul DeBolt is Government Contracts Practice Group co-leader with Venable LLP. Hello, Paul.
Hello, how are you today?
Good, and thank you so much for joining me today. What
My
are the
pleasure.
big what are the big developments or changes that we're likely to see in the coming year when it comes to requirements for conducting business with the federal government?
Well, I think one of the major changes is going to be that I think there'll be a reduction in the regulations that government contractors are required to follow. I think one of the mantras throughout the campaign process has been that American businesses are overregulated. It's strangling them, it's impacting their profitability, and something needs to change. And as one of the biggest buyers in the world, certainly the government has the ability to do that.
Mhm. But
I
when
mean,
it comes, when I'm sorry, go ahead. Did you want to finish that thought?
yeah, I had a couple other thoughts too. I mean, I
Okay.
think overlay you have is sort of have a administration that's predisposed to reducing the regulatory framework, but you also have this new entity that's being created, the Department of Government Efficiency, and one of its mandates, in addition to you know restructuring or eliminating some agencies, is to eliminate regulations that are either deemed unnecessary or unduly burdensome. So I think there's going to be a strong push to
Mhm.
sort of take what's perceived to be the handcuffs off of businesses that do work with the federal government.
But at the same time, if you're cutting regulations on one hand, on the other hand, the promise of huge reductions in the federal budget might reduce opportunities for contractors in the first place. Is that not the possibility?
I mean, I think there is some risk that there could be reduced opportunities for government contractors going forward. I think that the Department of Defense is certainly going to continue to receive its share of the public fisc. I certainly think the Department of Homeland Security is going to receive a significant share of the public fisc. I think CBP, Custom Border Patrol, is going to receive a big chunk of money. I think where the pressure is going to be is on some of the civilian agencies that are not necessarily in line with the incoming administration's priorities. I think that, for example, there's already been a discussion about the Department of Education being eliminated. I think there could be some reduction in the spending that's given to EPA because of a refocusing of priorities. I
Mhm.
think HUD, Housing and Urban Development, could get less money. So I think it's really going to be incumbent on government contractors to really focus on their portfolio, and to the extent that they're too heavily reliant on civilian agencies, they may want to look to expand their footprint.
Mhm.
And of course, they can do that organically, although it can be a challenge to get into a new agency, or they can do it through mergers and acquisitions. And I think that the new administration will probably be more predisposed to accept certain business combinations.
Yeah. Okay. So given the fact, as you say, less red tape in general, but it's hard to believe that the government relaxed its restrictions and its requirement for vetting contractors when it comes to defense purchases, military and sensitive intelligence, and lists of countries and suppliers around the world who are banned from participating in such bids. Will that continue to be a prime concern?
I think there will be. I mean, I think there's going to be a focus in the new administration on Buy American, which has
Mhm.
been prevalent, and there's been a real focus in the election cycle to have good paying jobs in America, keep American jobs on American soil. So I think that that will happen. And I think that will give companies greater control over the supply chain. I think that you'll still see a rigorous supply chain enforcement review mechanism. And I think, cybersecurity is still going to continue to be front of mind.
Sure.
So I think the things to keep the bad people out or to disrupt our ability to protect ourselves, I think that regulatory framework will stay in place. But there has been some discussion about trying to get new providers of goods and services into the federal marketplace, and a lot of these companies have sat on the sidelines because they view the regulatory burden as too hard to meet or too expensive, or they're worried about all the tools the government has in its arsenal when things go wrong. You
Yeah.
know, like you consider to be a contract issue could get spun up into a Civil False Claims Act.
But again, to
And
this issue of vetting, just for a moment, there's still going to be concerned about the foreign ownership, control, and influence law. You've got to look out for that in terms of due diligence, do you not?
yeah, you do. I mean, there's still a concern with foreign ownership, control, and influence. I don't think that's going to go by the wayside. I haven't really seen a lot in the discussion about how the new administration could impact the CFIUS process, but
You explain that to us, Sisypheus, please.
there's a review process that occurs that if you're going to buy certain entities, it gets reviewed by various government agencies,
Mhm.
and they decide whether the purchase can go through or what sort of mitigation measures have to be implemented to protect the government interest. You
I
know, like
see.
a foreign ownership, control, and influence. You could have, a special security agreement. You can have a proxy board. I mean, there's lots of ways to control it. Some of the countries that we're more friendly with, the standard is less stringent. I think like Great Britain comes to mind, but others, you know, it can be more difficult and the controls can be much more stringent. I mean, I still think that like if an Iranian company came in and tried to buy something that was a critical foreign asset, like that's not going to happen. I don't think that'll
Yeah.
change.
Did we not see in recent years a tightening up on the part of the federal government when it comes to requiring third-party verification and auditing for supplying products or services to the DoD? And will that continue?
Um, I think it will. I think that the government is very concerned with the supply chain. I think they're very concerned with supply chain security. I think they're very concerned with inadvertently giving entities access to information they shouldn't otherwise have access to. So I imagine that will continue. I think that, what may change is within the various agencies a reprioritization of programs, and that I think that the programs that will continue to be funded, the new programs that are going to come into existence are going to be more fully aligned with the current administration's priorities.
So what advice do you have to prospective contractors who are wishing to gain total visibility of their supply chains and be in compliance with all of these federal government contracting guidelines?
I mean, I think you have to start just with some basic blocking and tackling. I mean, I think you can do some audits and you should have some well, almost like due diligence papers that you have your suppliers fill out and certify about sourcing and relationships so that you have some sort of auditable record. And I think you have to be selective in what things you're going to pursue. I mean, this could be one of the problems, right? Like we have Doge talking about reducing fraud, waste, and abuse in the government contracting space, but yet they want to secure supply chain. And then how much do you have to spend to ensure that the supply chain is secure? And how does that translate into a higher price?
Right.
So if the more controls you have to have in place, the more people you have to have implementing the controls, the higher the price. So I think, throughout this whole process, there's going to be a lot of tension between what has been the stated goal and what's going to be achievable in the context of, reducing the number of government workers, reducing the price that the government's paid for. I mean, there's not going to be a perfect solution, and all the goals don't necessarily dovetail nicely with one another.
Yeah. Paul DeBolt of Venable LLP, thank you so much for giving us a snapshot into what potential and existing government contractors should be looking for in the coming year and beyond. Thank you very much for being with me today.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.